You know that club that just gets in the way in the Championship and they occasionally turn up in the Premier League and stink out the place? Yeah, I'm talking about West Brom. Yes, that club unbelievably used to be one of the best teams in the country and the world. Let me explain.
With that lucky rebound. It's a goal for Allen.
It was in 1879 where the club was formed by a good old bunch of lads in the George Salter Springworks, and they called themselves West Bromwich Strollers. 2 years later they finally found the name Albion to replace their suffix, saving everyone the eternal embarrassment. By 1883 they were entering themselves into the FA Cup, but they got knocked out in the first round by a team called Wednesbury United, and if you say you've heard of them, you're a liar or a time traveller, because the original club only existed until 1885. They fare a bit better the following season, reaching the quarter-finals and even disposing of Aston Villa along the way, as well as beating a team called Druids. The following year went even better, the highlight being Jem Bayliss' hat-trick against Old Westminsters in the quarter-final. Ultimately though, the run died again at the hands of Blackburn Rovers in a replayed final at Derbyshire's County Cricket Ground. Jem Bayliss would continue to be the club's first hero, not only top scoring in the subsequent 1886-87 campaign, but netting in a couple of cup games as the Albion made another cup final. In a football landscape dominated by Midlands and Northern teams, Villa awaited at the Oval. Villa, who had fallen to Albion in the cup a couple of years ago, but this time they would not be nearly as successful, Albion winning silver, not gold. Would it be third time lucky? Jem Bayliss seemed to think so, starting with a hat-trick in a 7-1 evisceration of Wednesbury Old Athletic. Who knew Wednesbury had so much footballing appetite? Bayliss grabbed the only goal against an outfit called Mitchell St George's before seeing off Wolves in the third, earning a bye to the fifth, before the star striker arguably had his finest performance yet in a 4-1 win over Stoke. Then via Old Carthusians and Derby Junction, yes that's a separate team to the modern Derby County, West Brom returned to the Oval for the third season in succession. Waiting for them were Preston North End, you know that team that were about to become invincible when the Football League became a thing later on in the year. But would they be invincible here? Yeah, you're a serial killer if you thought I was actually going to be able to show you footage from the 1888 FA Cup final. Either way, your boy and mine, Jem Bayliss, got the opener, while semi-final legend Spry Woodall grabbed the winner. West Bromwich Albion had their first piece of silverware and could arguably lay claim to being the best football team in England and therefore the planet. The final though didn't belong to Bayliss or Woodhall, but the club's new creator-in-chief, the 19-year-old Billy Bassett. Despite sounding as though he makes licorice for a living, he assisted the opener and later found out he was being called up to the England squad. Albion had their new hero. It was Bassett who top scored the following campaign, where Albion helped inaugurate a new football league called the Football League. Despite reaching the semi-final of the Cup and putting in a few decent performances by all accounts, they were ultimately stopped by Preston, like everybody else in England. The following year they didn't even make it past the first round of the Cup, losing in a replay to Accrington, whilst sitting a place higher in fifth this time, one place above Accrington. The 1890-91 campaign was comfortably Albion's worst yet. They shat the bed in the league competition, winning 5 of 22 matches, and were faced with the embarrassment of going cap in hand for re-election. Meanwhile, they were nowhere really in the cups, losing once again to Blackburn Rovers. They'd get their revenge over Rovers the following year in the cup, and despite minimal improvements in the league, going from 12th all the way to 12th, but now third bottom thanks to league expansion, Albion went the distance in the cup once again. A marathon semi-final against Nottingham Forest went further than the allotted distance, twice before Albion thought, sod it, let's end this, sticking 6 past a sorry Forest team, featuring a hat-trick from Jasper Geddes. Geddes would come up trumps in the final as Albion not just beat Villa, but completely pulverised them in front of 32,000 souls, 3-0 at the Oval. West Brom were getting on for being just about one of the more successful teams in the land by this point. Sadly, the title would come to elude them for the remainder of the 19th century. They didn't even win a cup game for 2 years until, yes that's right, they marched straight back to the final in 1895 as they regressed to 13th place in the league. Whilst their subsequent positions would prove that this wasn't a temporary blip, Albion lost out to Villa again in what was already their 5th cup final. Only the Old Etonians and Blackburn Rovers could better their tally by this point. And yet by 1900 they christened their first season in a brand new stadium that they were busy calling the Hawthorns, and that campaign they were belatedly relegated from the top tier. One hell of a shock to the system. It was clear that the Albion were just too strong for Division 2, gaining re-entry back to the big time at the first available opportunity and with a record points tally. With a potential reset on the cards, what could West Brom achieve now? They went back down in their second season despite the new management of Fred Everest, who would eventually coach over 1,500 games for the club over 46 seasons. This time they would not immediately return, languishing in the hell of the second division as part of the Hawthorns burnt to the ground, ironically enough, on Bonfire Night 1904. A stabilising mid-table finish gave way for a long, murky and by the end dull resurgence as they peppered the upper echelons of the table, finishing in the top 5 in 4 successive campaigns, yet they found themselves no nearer the top flight. Until that was a second half of the 1910-11 campaign for the ages. After losing 2 on the bounce straddling January and February, they would lose just 1 game before the end of the season. Crucially though, that 1 game came against third place Chelsea, who could still catch the Albion come the final day of the season. 2 points separated the pair, Albion simply needing a point at home to Huddersfield Town. Chelsea's superior goal average though, keeping things tense. Ultimately a Fred Buck penalty slotted nervelessly through the goalkeeper to confirm the 1-0 win, and with it, Albion's place back in the First Division. The new hero on the block was unsung hero local lad Jesse Pennington, who had signed from Dudley Town in 1903 and would spend 19 years and almost 500 games at the Hawthorns, becoming the club's most tenured player until the 70s. The Albion couldn't have been more mid-table if they tried at the turn of the year, known to the locals as 1912. 13th, almost as close to the title as they were relegation, and now it was time for the FA Cup to restart. And because I'm building it up to you like this, you just know they went and did something spectacular. Spurs, Leeds City, Sunderland and Fulham all eliminated before Blackburn required a replay. For the first time in the 20th century, the Baggies had boinged into the FA Cup final. You'll have to trust me that Barnsley won that game, since there's no goal in the only scraps of footage, but by contemporary accounts it was a game lost in a just method. Albion defenders not willing to stop the Barnsley counter with a foul. Albion lost the cup final, but they won the hearts of the neutrals. That or the near 40,000 at Bramall Lane probably called them a bunch of mugs before celebrating the local winners. From the proceeds, Albion would purchase the freehold of the Hawthorns, allowing them to expand the grandstand. A sound investment as they recorded 5th place in 1914. Less sound when the Great War halted the sport for 4 long years. When they came back, West Bromwich Albion, like many others, were a changed team to match the world they now inhabited. Fred Morris was one of those careers flourishing after the conflict. Signed in 1911 but not included in either of the 1912 FA Cup finals, he became prolific, netting 2 on the opening afternoon against Oldham Athletic. As would Bowser, and I should need not to say this, but no, not that one. His finest display was helping himself to a hat-trick against Bradford City at the end of September. By this point the goals had started to flow, 16 in the past 4 games as Albion ended September atop English football. There was no signs of the goals slowing, West Brom making a mockery of the idea that goals are increasingly hard to come by heading into the 20s. October the 25th's 8-0 humbling of Notts County included 5 for Morris, who saw to that one. November was a curious little beast since Albion chucked in a 2-0 defeat to those very same Nottingham opponents 7 days later before succumbing to home losses to Villa and Wednesday. Rattled, but the Baggies were still only a point off the Burnley pace and still had their game in hand. December, however, was the turning point. Not perfect from a results perspective, as Manchester City fell on consecutive weekends before Derby and Sunderland were beaten by an aggregate of 11-0 across 3 matches to end a successful return to competitive football. There is the idea that goal difference is a good barometer for who the strongest team in a division is. To put West Brom's prowess into a truer light than their 1-point lead over Burnley, their plus 36 goal difference was better than all the other members of the top 6 combined as we entered 1920. Mystifyingly, the Albion shipped 4 goals to the team they'd not 1 week prior scored 4 beyond. Sunderland. To call the next 2 games in the league a rebound was an understatement. 10 slapped beyond Blackburn, the bread in an ultimately disappointing sandwich considering that the FA Cup was surrendered immediately at home to Barnsley. Nonetheless, the title was almost appearing sealed come the end of January as Man United were dispatched, opening up a 5-point lead with 2 games in hand over Burnley. Whilst the goals wouldn't come as consistently, Albion still managed to hit 4 beyond their opponents on 5 separate occasions. It removed the jeopardy and the drama, but the Albion had their title, their only league title, wrapped up with 4 games to spare. Bowser's penalty sealing a 3-1 win over Bradford Park Avenue. The Charity Shield quickly followed in May, where the Albion dispatched of Spurs. The success was infectious. The reserve team had won the local Birmingham and District League at the same time, so the question was, could this be a new wave of West Brom glory? Short answer no, slightly longer answer, the club simply returned to the mid-table fodder they had largely been pre-war. It didn't really matter much that they improved a little to 7th and drew in crowds in excess of 50,000 on a semi-regular basis. They instantly found themselves dropping back down to the depths of 16th. Modern day West Brom fans know only too well about yo-yoing. The 2000s saw them change divisions more frequently than anybody in quick succession. The 1920s though was premium yo-yoing, from the fringes of a relegation conversation to more than a whiff of a title prospect come the 24-25 season. Although the first 3 games suggested another struggle, a stringent Albion side quickly worked their way up the table with a series of 1-goal triumphs and, if they were feeling extra spicy, a 2-goal win. On Christmas morning, the Albion led the division by a point, and despite a quite frankly ludicrous 3 games in 3 days, all of which were won, they went into 1925 having only extended their lead by a point. They weren't facing mugs, unlike the campaign when they won the league. This time round, they found themselves tangling with Herbert Chapman in his final Huddersfield Town season. And if you know only a sliver of information about his record, or you've watched my video on him here, click, you'll know the Albion were pretty doomed. But they continue to rattle off the wins in advance of a trip to Leeds Road on March the 11th to meet their title foes. The sides were level on points, Albion holding a game in hand, and despite both points in the reverse fixture back in November, they could be pleased with their point in West Yorkshire against one of the more relentless teams in English football history. Albion wouldn't win until the penultimate day of March, but Huddersfield hadn't capitalised, even sinking to second. A defensively robust West Brom side wouldn't concede in their next 3 games, either side of Easter, dropping just a point, maintaining their gap to the Yorkshire club. Their elephant in the room being Town's game in hand. Then Easter Monday showed up, and Herbert Chapman's future employers Arsenal did him a solid, taking both points off the Albion at Highbury. What do I normally say? Easter is the kingmaker of the First Division. Town now led the league by a point, had a game in hand, and the campaign would be over by the end of the month. A win over Forest reignited the Albion hope, Joe Carter scoring the only goal at the City Ground, dragging the Baggies level on points ahead of the visit of Bury 7 days later. But that would turn into a load of bollocks, a load of Fred Bullock, who grabbed Bury's only goal in a 1-1 draw. It meant West Brom would need an astronomical goal swing on the final day, which was rendered pointless by a goalless draw at home to Bolton. There shouldn't have been any surprise therefore that Albion plummeted straight through to Division 2 by the end of the 1926-27 season. As Herbert Chapman started to deliver his Arsenal side up the league, West Brom had to build again. It wasn't all bad. First off, Jimmy Cookson beat Fred Morris's goal-scoring tally record in a single season, notching 38 in Albion's first campaign back in the second tier. Whilst they strung 3 mid-table campaigns together, the 1930-31 season was a novel one. Jimmy Cookson had carried the team top scoring in the past 3 seasons. Whilst he was still at the club, there was an undeniable new star, W.G. Richardson. He'd slapped 50 goals for the reserves in his first season at the club. Come November, he was belatedly handed his chance, finding the net twice in a 6-1 win over Nottingham Forest. The latest win had the Albion into second of 2 promotion places. Everton was some way in the distance and wouldn't be caught all season. West Brom had to ensure that they were factored into the gaggle of clubs that made up the chasing pack. Richardson scored in 6 of the next 7 games as 1930 became 31, only failing to score in a 0-0 draw at Barnsley on Christmas Day. In this time, the club dropped just 3 points, setting themselves up for the remainder of the year. They led Spurs by a point and Wolves by 2 in what was the battle in the division, considering the title was Everton's to lose. What Albion didn't need was a 3-match series with Charlton Athletic just to advance into the 4th round of the Cup. Thankfully, the next 2 rounds were easily more navigable. Spurs beaten at the Hawthorns before Richardson netted the only goal at Fratton Park in the 5th round. That was Valentine's Day, and since then Albion's form had trailed off. A 5-1 battering at the hands of Plymouth on the final day of January, the low ebb. The gap to Spurs was 3 points, the game in hand almost meaningless if Albion were to be consumed by that cup run. The end of February saw an own goal prevent Albion progressing past fierce rivals Wolves on home soil, but 4 days later it was that dependable W.G. Richardson with the winner in the Molineux replay. 10 days later was a semi-final at Old Trafford against Everton. Old Trafford obviously being the equidistant stadium between the two. Nonetheless, a well-rested Albion were able to sneak beyond the second division leaders to book a first ever trip to Wembley to meet local rivals Birmingham City. Between cup ties, Albion had 9 league matches in 6 weeks, that game in hand still to play and only 2 points to make up on Spurs. Whilst the run started with a Glidden double at home to Preston, away points at Oldham and, in particular, Spurs weren't helpful, nor was a loss at Port Vale to begin April. The gap had now gaped to 4 points, reduced to a point after a bountiful Easter that saw Port Vale and Forest both beaten. Now things were back in Albion hands. A loss at Burnley 5 days later was partially soothed by the fact that Spurs could only draw. Given the difference was 0.03 in goal average, the promotion race was tantalising. A 3-0 win in Albion's game in hand against Reading, therefore, was enough to drag the club above Spurs by the barest of margins. With 3 games left, Albion were the ones with a 0.03 goal average advantage. 3 days later, that advantage was stretched minutely. A Shaw penalty at home to Bradford Park Avenue, enough for a point, while Spurs toiled away to defeat at Bristol City. April 25th was a pivotal day in West Brom's history. Spurs put the league pressure on, sticking 4 beyond Barnsley to go second. Meanwhile, the Albion had a date with Wembley. West Brom had become the first team from outside the top division to lift the FA Cup in 19 years. Not since they themselves were on the receiving end against Barnsley in 1912 had a club achieved that. Now Albion had the chance to become unique. It started with a trip to Stoke on a Thursday night. I don't have the weather forecast for April 1931, but let's be honest, it was probably blowing a gale. Cup hero W.G. Richardson netted the winner, leaving a final day for the ages. Albion led by a point. They had enough of a goal average superiority, they just likely had to avoid defeat. Who else but W.G. Richardson with the winning goal in a 3-2 triumph over Charlton. West Brom had become the first team to win promotion and win the FA Cup in the same season. It has never been done again, and the chances of it happening again are now slim to none. Between 1972 and 1980 there was a spate of second tier clubs who won the FA Cup, but none of Sunderland, Southampton or West Ham went up, finishing 6th or 7th respectively. Not only did Albion stay in the top flight, they were competitive, recording 3 top 7 finishes as Richardson smashed in 83 goals across those campaigns. There were no sign of him slowing as he hit 25, 8 of which coming in yet another run to Wembley in 1935. Sadly, it wouldn't end in the same type of glory, losing to Sheffield Wednesday, and by the time football was postponed for yet another war, the goals of W.G. Richardson had dried up and Albion had crashed out of the top flight once again. The war put an end to the top-class career of W.G. Richardson, his 200-plus goals appearing to be almost unattainable, a once-in-a-lifetime freak. Come the 1950s, however, West Brom had found his heir, one Ronnie Allen. But first we have to rewind a year or two to the Albion's grand return to the top flight in the first campaign many had known without Fred Everest as a secretary manager. Whilst replacement Jack Smith was unable to secure the title, promotion was achieved nonetheless. A steady mid-table position was achieved under his watch, as Dave Walsh's prolific form had to be replicated by Ronnie Allen since Walsh had been acquired by Aston Villa. Come Allen's second campaign, the Hawthorns had its new hero, the frontman netting 32 goals in another, ultimately, middling season. Jesse Carver took the club to the fringes of a title race in the 1952-53 campaign, but his nomadic managerial career took yet another turn when he returned to Serie A with Lazio come the final hurdle. 4th place, the club's finest finish since the title tussle with the Terriers of Huddersfield 27 years prior. And the man the Albion had hired next had the Hawthorns abuzz with the promise that they might be able to win yet again. Vic Buckingham was in the building. They started the campaign in quite frankly unbelievable form, winning 7 of their first 9, which included sticking a ridiculous 7 beyond a great Newcastle United team at St James's Park. They'd scored the most goals, let in the least, and most excitingly of all, they were 3 points atop the league. Not only that, they were ahead of Stan Cullis's Wolves, their nearest and dearest rivals both geographically and now competitively. Whilst Charlton were the first to defeat Albion all season and trips to Blumfield Road and agonisingly Molineux were also empty-handed before December, Ronnie Allen was still hitting the goals in with regularity. His hat-tricks against Huddersfield and Chelsea in October were raised by the 4 he netted against Cardiff in November, the perfect retaliation to Black Country Derby defeat. The Albion were still in control of their fate by the time the Cup bestowed Chelsea upon them, an own goal settling that 3rd round tie as they kept Wolves in close counsel, trailing by just a point after 26 matches. With a double attempt clearly apparent, this time Buckingham wouldn't let Albion be dredged into the stalemate of trench warfare in the Cups, dispatching of Rotherham, Newcastle and Spurs at the first time of asking to reach the semi-finals against Port Vale at Villa Park. Albion were not only the favourites to reach Wembley, they were favourites for the Cup. With the semis awaiting on the 27th of March, it wasn't that but the visit of Wolves the week after in league contest that burned on Albion supporters' minds. Before the trip up to Sunderland to end the month, it was feasible that Albion could almost put the champagne on ice with a win over their fiercest rivals. The gap would be 4 points and with a game in hand and only 6 games remaining. Then it all fell apart. Not on the cup front, Port Vale were predictably eliminated, but in the league, as goalkeeper Norman Heath broke his neck in a defeat to Sunderland, ending his career before Roy Swinburne grabbed the only goal in the most important Black Country derby in history. The pendulum had swung, but the championship was split in Albion's favour by 0.071 of a goal. Cardiff twisted the knife in a week later, finally handing the initiative back to Wolves. It was a horrendous 3-game run that Albion would not recover from, only winning 1 from their last 4 in the league, and even that was against Manchester City via the penalty spot. Conceding 9 in 2 league games at Villa and Portsmouth was hardly the best preparation to win the Cup.
Lee with a lucky rebound. It's a goal for Allen. Up goes Morrison. Offside. Yes, the referee has. The referee has given him offside. No, he's not. So after 51 minutes, it's West Bromwich Albion down by 2 goals to 1. And now it's Ray Barlow, and it's a penalty. Gone. Griffith. They're the victors, led by Len Millard. Very happy captain.
Yes, it's West Brom week on what is the Tour of Britain. Fancy catching up? Click on this playlist right here.